I tell you what, man, the past couple of years, LSU had some weapons in that offense. Just straight weapons. It's crazy, isn't it? I mean, especially when you go back to the 2019 season, all that they had going in that offense. I ain't no damn surprise that they were such a prolific, explosive, high-powered, record-setting type of offense. Because you had a quarterback that went number 1 overall. You had a wide receiver that went in the first round. A tight end that, while undrafted, was certainly a great college player. You had 2 other wide receivers that had NFL draftable grades that are now part of this year's draft class. You had the running back that went round 1. Like, god damn. It wasn't the Les Miles era of LSU offensive football anymore, that's for damn sure. And as a result, it can make it a little challenging to evaluate some of these guys that come from a school and a program like this, similar to Alabama, with all their weapons on offense. As you try to figure out, like, ignoring some of the results, like, what are the projectable traits here? How do they specifically translate? And were they in a situation where you could mask some of their deficiencies? Were they in a situation where they didn't get the same focus as some other guys, where guys at some schools were clear-cut number 1 options, and as a result they got more bracket and shadow coverage, double coverage, etc.? Yeah, defenses kind of playing for them. Or is it like a Terrace Marshall who you said, hey, I can't really, account for him as much because I got to worry about, a Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson in 2019, or in 2020 you still have other weapons there at LSU. Even with Jamar Chase opting out, you still had Terrace Marshall, you had other guys. Now, offense wasn't the same, but you still kind of get my point here. So, in a draft short, pardon the expression, but short on guys that you view in terms of that traditional outside wide receiver profile, a guy like Terrace Marshall is going to get a lot of looks here. And a lot of people are going to be really trying to figure out, like, just how good can this guy be? Like, is he a similar type of potential player to a Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson from the year before? Is this a guy that you can see, envision being a potential number 1 wide receiver in the NFL? And I'll be honest, he's been a guy that's been on my radar for a couple of years that, it seemed like every time I saw him, he made a big play. Every time I saw him, he did some type of big splashy thing that made me go, wow, like, that's going to be a dude. Like, obviously, you can see Justin Jefferson at LSU was going to be really good in the NFL. You could see in 2019 where Jamar Chase looked like he was going to be a future, top 10, top 15 pick. But then I looked at Terrace Marshall, I'm like, goddamn, this dude can play, and at sometimes he seems to be more exciting and more electric than the other 2 guys in that wide receiving group in 2019. And I certainly think he did. But now, as I come back and I look at him a little bit more, he reminds me so much of Alshon Jeffery. It's crazy. And some of you that have watched me for a long time are going to sit there and say, oh, man, you hated Alshon Jeffery. Yes and no. I was wrong somewhat on the evaluation, that's for sure, although I wasn't that incredibly wrong. I think part of it was he just wasn't the guy that I envisioned the Bears should take in that second round in 2012, and that never really helped. But I look at a guy like Alshon Jeffery, and I see a lot of similarities to Terrace Marshall. And let me kind of walk through those. And this is probably going to make sense to a lot of you. Not the quickest guy. So this is a guy that can struggle in terms of his release, struggle getting up to speed, struggle getting a clean release off of the line. Once he gets up to speed, though, he can surprise you in a straight-ahead fashion how good his speed is, because he's not particularly bursty, he's not particularly explosive. But similar to Alshon Jeffery, this is a guy, if you're not careful, he can get over the top on you. When you look at him, he's not an incredibly polished route runner. Like, the route tree is not expansive. You're not looking at a Terrace Marshall just like you did with an Alshon Jeffery and expect him to be able to do a whole bunch of things as a route runner. He's not going to make a bunch of defensive backs uncomfortable. Like, that's not how he's going to win at the next level. He's going to have trouble at times getting separation, similar to what an Alshon Jeffery did. Now, he could use some of his physicality and his body control to make the tough catches, to get the contested catches. Terrace Marshall could do that just like Alshon Jeffery did, both at South Carolina and the NFL with the Bears and the Eagles. But then you also have the piece of the durability. Now that kind of manifested itself for Alshon at the NFL level, but for Terrace Marshall, it's like it seemed like it was always something. It's a little thing here, it's a little thing there. Like, is he going to be a guy that's injury prone? Is he going to be a guy that you worry about just how much you have the ability of availability with him? And like I said, with Alshon, like, yeah, it seems like some years you would only get 9, 10, 11 games out of him because it was a toe injury, a foot injury, a hamstring injury, or whatever. Like, it always seemed like there was something wrong with Alshon Jeffery. But when you had him on the field and you had him healthy, a guy like an Alshon Jeffery could have a couple of really huge monster performances in a season. And Bears fans and even Eagles fans, I'm sure, know what the hell I'm talking about, especially Bears fans. Like when he was the number 2 opposite of Brandon Marshall, like he could have those games where he had 8 catches for 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, and made 2 or 3 of the most spectacular catches you would see all season long. And then you wouldn't see him for a month. You'd see him because he played, but you wouldn't see him. You wouldn't hear shit out of him. And he'd be taken out of the offense. And if you look at Terrace Marshall the past couple of years at LSU, I think you see a similar pattern, a similar trend. Like, this is a guy that could go out there and have a game of 7 or 8 catches for 240 yards and 3 touchdowns, and he looks dominant. He looks like the best player on the field, and you're sitting there saying, this dude's not that quick, but goddamn, there he goes for a 70-yard touchdown. Where the hell did that come from? But then you could go a month before he makes another big play. So there's a bit of a yo-yo here in terms of inconsistency, and sometimes that could be based off of the coverages that they face. Sometimes that's just based off of the fact that, you know, a guy like Terrace Marshall is limited in terms of his route running, limited in terms of his ability to get separation. These are guys that, you know, if you have guys that are really good in press coverage, they can cause some problems for these guys. And for a Terrace Marshall, I think it's a similar type of thing to an Alshon Jeffery. Now, if they can figure out how to get over that, and you could throw the ball to him in the right spot, you know, there's the guys that can make those big spectacular catches and make those big time plays. You know, Terrace Marshall's hands are good, but not outstanding. Like, one of the things that used to frustrate me about Alshon Jeffery was that you'd have this game where he felt like he could make all the difficult catches, and then the basic ones he would drop on a pretty consistent basis. It's just really, really weird. So you look at him, another SEC type of wide receiver, similar size package. Does that make sense, guys? Like, you look at Terrace Marshall and you feel like in some ways you're seeing an Alshon Jeffery clone? It does to me, at least. And I might be crazy. Well, I am crazy, but I look at somebody like this and you're saying, hey, in a draft where you're lacking those bigger, more traditional number 1, number 2 outside type of wide receivers, does that indicate that Terrace Marshall's stock may rise a little bit in terms of where he's been perceived before? It could. Like, he's the type of guy that somebody might gamble on very, very late in round 1 or very early in round 2, and other guys that grade out a little bit better may end up going ahead of him because they're going to see some of these other slot guys and view them all kind of in a bucket together and say, you know, if I don't get the absolute pick of the litter this round, the next round, I'll still get a choice of a number of good guys, but there's not a lot of guys that profile like Terrace Marshall could. But I caution, these guys that lack some of the explosiveness and burst, like, they have to win in other ways, and I don't know that he always consistently showed at the college level that he could win in those other ways, which is going to be an impact at times at the NFL level. Terrace Marshall, like Alshon Jeffery, seems to me a guy that could be where you have that one game where he's outstanding and then you don't hear from him for another 3 to 4 weeks. You're not taking those types of guys in the first round, nor should you. When the Bears took Alshon Jeffery, he was a later pick in round 2. Like, that's where I see you start thinking about taking a guy like Terrace Marshall, even if you say what he brings to the table is more rare than some of these other slot guys, because they're just some of those other slot guys are just flat out better, more consistent players. I think the injury history should matter here a little bit. And then you got to worry about, like, at the LSU offense, you know, just how much were you able to hide him at times because you couldn't really hone in on him, focus on him entirely. He's a good prospect, intriguing to a certain degree, but I've seen some mock drafts have him in, like, later rounds 2, 3, some maybe even have him sliding into round 1. I feel like round 1 is a little bit of hoping, wishing, and praying, and maybe even reaching at this point. I've put a third-round grade on him because of the durability thing, because of the lack of quickness, the lack of ability to consistently separate, the lack of great route running skills. Like, those are the things that have him a little bit lower on my charts. But he's a guy that once you get to round 2, like, I certainly wouldn't have any problems with the team taking a chance on him because, again, what he brings to the table is a little more unique than a lot of the other wide receivers in this class. But I do absolutely anticipate that wherever he's drafted, there will be several other wide receivers taken after him that end up having better, more productive